You can certainly, if you want, just create everything inside of Animate. It is a vector drawing program. Again, the biggest thing to make sure is that you make sure your final graphics, whether you do them in Animate or Photoshop or Illustrator or come up with something else, like Sketch, for example, you're definitely going to want 960 by 540. It's going to be our width and height. And that's really all we have to worry about is sizing. So you could, if you wanted, just draw everything inside of Animate and present it like that. Probably take some screenshots or export images and show it off that way. I'd say the most common is to use Photoshop. All right, so if I were to create a new document in Photoshop, it's 960 by 540. Now, the resolution can be interesting. Usually, for the most part, unless we're talking about like retina screens and things like that, resolution for the most part is just applicable to print, and the resolution really is just the pixel size, and that's how it's going to be. So the resolution doesn't really matter. 72 is usually about the lowest. That's usually like traditional screen DPI. Some people like 150 just to give it a little richness. You usually go up around 300 at least if you're going to actually print something out. But you probably can just leave this at its default. But if you're up into the thousands or something resolution, that's probably a little intense. But that really has little value when we're actually presenting things on the screen. It's just about the pixel size, 960 by 540. As long as you've got that, your resolution shouldn't matter that much. You also want to make sure that you are using RGB color rather than grayscale or CMYK. CMYK would be for print. You definitely want to be in the RGB color space. And then you could probably choose 16-bit or 32-bit. Doesn't really matter. Difference being more colors and being able to have like a transparency channel and stuff. So make sure you set up your document at the right size. Make sure that you're using RGB color. Your resolution, whatever. And you can set that up and then create your final graphics. So if you're using Animate, you can just organize it into different keyframes or different layers or whatever you'd like. If you're just drawing inside of Animate. If you are creating things in Photoshop, whether you're just drawing, or you're importing images or whatever, and compiling them, usually people will keep it in one single Photoshop document, and then you can organize it with layers and folders of layers and things like that. I've worked with the designers who like to have different documents for each main section, or I've worked with designers that like to have one giant document and have every single page kind of organized and laid out in layers. One thing to realize though is be organized with what you name your layers and how you separate things and whatnot, because you can import Photoshop files into Animate and retain all of the layers and all of the layout and everything without having to do it all again, which is really cool and really powerful. Be sure that you separate, whether you're doing it in Animate or Illustrator or Photoshop or anything, be sure that you separate any individual elements onto separate layers. So for example, buttons, make sure that, you don't just draw a button as part of a big background and you can't separate it. So make sure that you have things on separate layers so you can make individual symbols out of them, buttons, characters, anything you want to move around. Just make sure they're kind of all on different layers so you can separate them in different objects when we get to doing it. Like I said, you can also use Illustrator. Difference being vector versus raster. We can use either or a combination of the two in this project. The upside of vector graphics is you can end up, they'll look crystal clear no matter how they're scaling. So you could have your whole project kind of scale to fit the size of the screen. So I'll show you a little bit more about how that works also. Raster graphics can just have a lot richer of a look, and they even, aside from complicated vectors, if you have a lot of animation and transitions and things, those can actually start to slow down performance on mobile devices and things like that. So usually if it's like a mobile game or something like that, usually even the vector stuff is kind of rasterized and turned into bitmaps at some point because you can get a lot better performance on mobile like that. So let me talk about just a couple of kind of design 101 type things for you to consider as you're laying out your final graphics. But really, in a nutshell, in the same way that I didn't really give you a specific format or a specific kind of boilerplate for these content maps and wireframes, because there's a lot of different ways to do it. When it comes to the final graphics, it really just comes down to you should be able to scroll through these in the PDF or print them and stick them on a wall, and there should be zero questions. There should be zero, having to point anything out or explain like this is going to be this is going to be that. It should be all of your final assets ready to go. Let's start with one of the first things to play with is color. All right, so if I go to, if you haven't seen this tool before, it's pretty cool, but color.adobe.com. Let's load up. And this is a really cool way to be able to create color schemes, and just creating a color scheme that has some kind of basis in, color theory gives you a good starting point to create an interface if you haven't really done much design or anything like that before. So what's cool about this program is there's a lot of different ways we can combine these colors and make these color schemes. First of all, on the color wheel, we've got whichever our base color is. So I'm starting in the middle here, and I can go ahead and change the base color to be one specific color that I'm looking for. Looks like this is, I can put in the hex value, or I'm not sure if this is CMYK perhaps. Oh no, I see, it's RGB and then luminosity it's showing. I can even change that to CMYK or the hue saturation or whatever. You can start with one particular color, and then it will automatically give you these other colors that are kind of related to it, right? So if I want to see the colors that are analogous, meaning they are close to it in value, basically. I had some color theory back in the day, and it can be very dry and technical. It's interesting. As much as colors are visual and everything we do, there's quite a bit of technical jargon all around the way they relate to each other. So we could choose monochromatic and see all colors that are kind of grayscale but within the same value. Triad is giving us these three different values based on the three poles, so to speak, of the color value. Complementary gives you a few that are similar and then some that are complete opposite, which is really, really common in design. So you can get deep with getting these different colors, but it's nice, just a simple way to start with a color or two and come up with a couple other colors instead of just randomly choosing colors that are related that'll really help your designs go a long way. Another cool thing about this is, let's see, they've changed this a little bit since I've used it. Okay, here it is. So extract theme. This is kind of cool. Let's go steal an image. I'll talk in a minute about not stealing images, but I'm just going to go to Google Images for a minute, and let's grab an image of a baby monkey. Okay. We're going to grab an actual baby monkey, like maybe this excited fellow, this green in the background like this. So if I were to take this and just save this image, I'm going to save it to my downloads folder. All right. Now from this color thing, I can, opening my downloads folder on my other screen, just dragging the image onto this. And notice that it's smart enough to just grab color values from this image, which is really cool. Like this image is really nice. It's got these nice complementary green with this burnt orange color. Really has it's really popping out from the background. So you could find any kind of benchmark or anything like that and pull it in and start to draw your color values from that as well. These different options as well over here on the left. But it's really, really cool to be able to go in and either start with an individual color or start with an image. You can even, this is new since I've played with this a few months ago, you can even extract gradients out of this now, which is really cool. Let's see, we've got some accessibility tools. This is very, very much a thing. Even Adobe is taking it seriously now. And you can see if your color values, how they apply to someone that might have color blindness. But this is a really, really good starting point to be able to just get a color scheme. So then besides colors, another thing would be fonts, all right? When we're working on the internet, we need to use what are called web fonts. And the easiest way to do it is just to use Google Fonts. There are some Adobe web fonts that we could get into if we really can't find anything on Google Fonts, but fonts.google.com. Right now there are 1,003 different fonts. If there's something specific, a specific font you can typically search for it, like go to Google and search for like Helvetica New Google font equivalent, and you can usually find something that's pretty close. Google Fonts is nice that it'll kind of show you the most popular fonts as they're used, when you can search for all kinds of different categories and font properties and stuff. But ultimately, I'll show you guys later, but there is a way inside of Animate, without dealing with any kind of code, to tell it which web font you want to use. Now, the reason web fonts are important is because you need to make sure that you have a web font. If you just slap any old font on there, it's very possible that the end user won't have the same font, and their computer will render the font as like Times New Roman or something just hideous compared to what you intended. So when we're building for the web, it's very important to use actual web fonts. So some kind of color scheme, some kind of font. Rule of thumb with fonts, you typically never ever want more than 2 different fonts. And sometimes you'll use one for like major headers or titles and use another one for body text that's a little more legible. But a lot of the time also, you'll have just a single font family that has a bunch of different styles. So if I click on Open Sans, which is a really, really popular one, this is the default font on the Android operating system. But you can see that I could use Open Sans, and it goes from light, regular, semi-bold, bold, and we have all these different font values and font weights that you can kind of play with as well. So you do want to pick out a color scheme, a font scheme. But I show you this next part because it is extremely common in the design world to not have the real content yet when you're designing, because that's just somebody else's job, or they don't have it ready yet, or whatever. So it's very, very common to use what's called lorem ipsum as placeholder text. So if you go to lipsum.com, this teaches you all about lorem ipsum. And in a nutshell, lorem ipsum is just dummy text that happens to be Latin that has been used since the beginning of the printing press, long time. So you can come down here, and this is the standard lorem ipsum passage used since the 1500s. You can just grab this, copy it, and put it in as placeholder text, or you can grab little pieces of it. And I say that unless you're using the real text, you should use placeholder text in your final designs, because it is extremely important that we see the font. It's a major mistake in a final design to just have a box that says like text here, or have little bars that represent text, because the font you choose, the weight, the style, colors, all of that is so important to the final look that you need to have that all kind of figured out. So sometimes, all the time really in design comps, you may see this lorem ipsum text as placeholder text. And we use placeholder text, so on one hand, you can see how the text fits, all of its design and all of its style. Now, the reason we use Latin, and it's common to use this, rather than just like dummy text that you write yourself. Like maybe you'll just, start writing, or I literally have seen, all the time, and not just students, but professional designers out there will just write like text, or blah, 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 or they'll just start writing some gibberish or something. And that is just a bad idea, because no matter what, I've seen it in so many ways, shapes, and forms that in a business meeting, people, for whatever reason, they get really hung up on the text. And if it's just dummy text and it doesn't make sense, they'll just read it and get all confused and be like, what does that mean? Or if it just says text, or blah, 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 it just seems like unprofessional and unfinished. The point of this Latin text is that it has actual words and paragraphs, and you can put what real text would look like in there and see without having the actual text. And it's just the best way to have a placeholder, because, in some sense, it's gibberish that no one's going to read it and try and understand what it says and get off of the main focus, which is the design. So I'll honestly see lorem ipsum text a lot more in like wireframes and temporary designs rather than like a final finished design, but something worth pointing out at least. So color scheme, fonts, text. What else? Let's talk about images, how to not gank things off the internet. Okay, this is important. So some of you may be just drawing everything yourself, which is totally fine. Then you don't have to worry about any kind of copyright or anything. Some of you may be drawing graphics from other sources. And I don't mean drawing, collecting graphics from other sources. With imagery, now you can search and find any kind of, we could go to Google and I could search for like free clip art or maybe free vector images. And I might be able to find some sites that, freevector.com, great. Maybe I can get some free stuff. Maybe even as I click in, maybe these aren't actually free. I don't know, as we go through. We'll find this nice. Yeah, it's a free download, great. Different licenses or whatnot. Whenever you're using someone else's work, you just have to be wary and pay attention to make sure that it really is free, you really can use it. There's no license where you need to like give attribution to the author. But when you're searching for images, it can be tempting to do what I did and just go to Google Images and search for something. So if I look for baby monkey, great. But a lot of these could very well, when I'm not looking at these up here, as soon as I get down here, these could very well have copyrights and things on them that you are not allowed to use. Like this baby monkey is coming from Pinterest, but this could be like a National Geographic image or something like that. And so Creative Commons is a licensing system that was basically set up for indie artists and small shops and things that allows you to kind of create different licensing for your artwork. And there's different types of licensing. There's open licenses that you can just tell people they can use anything they want. Or there's different licenses that like say, okay, you can use this, but you have to give me credit, wherever you use it, different things like that. So what I can do though, is I'm gonna search for content, and instead of just going through Google Images, you pretty much, when you're searching for something you can use, you pretty much always wanna check both of these. So I want something that I can use commercially and I can modify or adapt. So in theory, anything that comes up in here, I'm gonna type today, search for it. In theory, these are all baby monkey images that I would actually be able to use. Now, granted, they're probably not going to initially be as great of quality as some of the other ones that would just come up naturally, but you can feel safe that you can use these, right? So there's some other options and things you can play with in here, but just using this search.creativecommons.org to search for imagery can be really powerful to find stuff that you can use. Now, when I'm working with clients, a lot of times I'll work with there's Getty Images is one of the most expensive ones, but has some of the best quality imagery. I know I have actually a friend of mine that she's a really high-end designer and has worked in major agencies in Chicago and New York, and has worked on big time clients, Fortune 500 clients. And she was telling me one time, she said, you know what, Chris, like 65% of my job is just picking out images. And she was sharing with me a lot of these tools and things she uses to pick out imagery to go through some of her designs. And she really highly recommended Stocksy.com and said that as an agency for the price, there was a lot of good, what she would call lifestyle images and things that just really, really had some good feel to them looking through in here. So if I were to search for baby monkey, oh yeah. You can find some mud. Look how smooth this gentleman is, right? So some nice soft monkeys. Oh, look at this. We've got a little baby monkey doing a dab with a kid. This is great. But it's also just as realistic as it is to use images that you can use. It's also very legit to use placeholder images from these paid image sites that just have watermarks on them. So if you look closely, you can see this says Stocksy United or whatever all over it. Getty Images will do the same thing. But, I don't necessarily want to have to pay $15 for a small version of the image, which these versions all just depend on the size. And we're doing 960 by 540, so the small is about as big as you would ever need it. But I don't need to actually buy it. I could actually just save this image with the watermark and use it. And in a design, that's very common to have paid images with watermarks on them to show the client, here's what I recommend. And then the client, you want to be very clear with them whether or not they need to buy images as part of their budget if they're not providing any. But this gives them the ability to kind of, and if they don't like it, say, you know what, let me search for some different images to use in that place, right? So you can go through and find some that you actually, can use professionally and commercially, or you could use commercial imagery like this, which can be very, very powerful, and just leave the watermarks on it. So what else? Went through some color schemes, some fonts, some placeholder text, some imagery. What else? I would say in general, just spacing. Try not to edge anything up too close to a specific edge, like all the way around the sides. When you're putting text inside of buttons, don't let it like touch the outside of the button. Just try and leave some space in between.